My daughter-in-law said it with a smile. "We'll take care of everything, especially you." But the way her eyes lingered on my locked drawer told me something else entirely. I didn't panic. I've lived long enough to know when silence is smarter than shouting. So I baked banana bread. And while they laughed in the kitchen, I planted a recording device under the counter. That was only the beginning. Before we dive into what happened next, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The morning began like most others. A hint of salt in the air from the Gulf drifted through the screen door while the coffee percolated in its old tin pot. The porch fan hummed a slow rhythm as cardinals darted between the branches of the magnolia tree. I watched them from the kitchen window, toast in one hand, a small jar of seed in the other. Feeding birds had become part of the rhythm, a quiet kind of companionship I never had to explain to anyone. That wrench on the shelf above the washer hadn't left my hand in years, but I polished it out of habit. It had built more than this house. It had held things together when grief might have broken them apart. My late wife, Mabel, would have said I was fussing too much, but the act felt sacred, one of the last things I could still do that was entirely mine. The phone rang just after 9. Grady's voice, always clipped at the ends like he was late for something, carried a forced cheer. "Hey Dad, listen, I've been meaning to call. Things are a little complicated right now." "Complicated?" "Work's unstable. Marla's taking on more contracts, but you know how that goes. Ellis needs space. We were wondering, just for a little while, if we could maybe stay with you until things even out." It wasn't a question, not really. There was a pause long enough to hear my heartbeat echo in the quiet kitchen. The instinct I hadn't relied on in years stirred, like a dog that had once been trained to bark at strangers. But I said yes. Of course I said yes. He was my son. "We'll be there in 2 days," he added before I could process what I'd agreed to. I hung up with the same hand that used to carry him upstairs when he fell asleep in the car. They arrived on a Wednesday, just past 5 p.m. The sun had mellowed but still painted the driveway gold. Grady stepped out first. Hair shorter than I remembered, carrying Ellis, who looked taller than I'd last seen him. Marla followed, heels clicking on the concrete, wheeling 2 large suitcases and wearing a fitted blazer. Though the day had been too warm for it, she smiled wide, too wide. "Orville, this house still smells like lemon and love," she said, hugging me with arms that smelled like designer soap. "We're so grateful." "You don't know what this means," she added, brushing past me into the living room like she owned the lease. Her eyes scanned the bookshelves, paused at the side table where my mail lay. When she spotted the drawer beneath it, her gaze lingered just a beat longer than it should have. "Don't worry," she said over her shoulder, that same smile fixed like it had been practiced in a mirror. "We'll take care of everything, especially you." I didn't reply, just noted how quickly she had taken inventory of my space, the way a realtor walks a property, already imagining the price tag. That night, we had roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and corn on the cob. Grady talked about his last job, something about real estate tech, already segueing into his plans for pivoting. Marla chimed in between bites, nodding strategically. Then she raised her glass and laughed. "We should probably label everything now before Dad forgets what's his." The silence that followed her joke rang louder than her laugh. Grady chuckled, too quickly. Ellis looked up from his peas, puzzled. I stared at the plate, not blinking. The joke landed. All right, landed right on top of something sacred. I didn't say a word, just stood up and cleared the table. Each plate heavier than it should have been. The kitchen sink hissed as I scrubbed. I let the sound drown everything else. Later that night, I stood by the window, looking out at the street I'd lived on for over 30 years. Porch lights blinked on one by one. My neighbor's wind chime caught the breeze, its sound too soft to be a warning, but it felt like one. I've lived too long to miss a red flag that waves this loudly. The thought whispered inside my head. Before going to bed, I opened my bedroom drawer, the one I hadn't opened in months. My fingers brushed the brass key taped beneath the lining, still there, still waiting. I checked the lock on the drawer, clicked it shut. Then I lay in the dark, eyes open, listening for what might come next. The filing cabinet clicked open with the same resistance it always had, like it didn't want to reveal anything too easily. The cool morning light slid across the bedroom floor as I pulled out the top drawer, fingers moving by memory. The yellow envelopes sat neatly, each labeled in my handwriting. But the one I expected to find, March 2013, Gulf Coast Credit Union, wasn't there. I checked again, moved aside a folder of old warranties, shifted my will, even peeked beneath the liner in case it had slipped behind. Nothing. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the space as if the envelope might feel guilty enough to reappear. It was an old account, technically inactive, but it had a chunk of savings I kept off the radar. Not for secrecy, just protection. I didn't need the money often, but knowing it was there made the world feel a little safer. That feeling evaporated. No signs of forced entry, no mess, just absence. The kind that echoes louder than broken glass. I relocked the drawer, this time checking the latch twice. Then I sat at my desk and wrote out a list of everything that had been in that folder. Not for the police, for me, to keep the facts straight in case someone tried to twist them later. Around noon, I stepped outside to check the mailbox. Janet, my neighbor from across the street, was out with her miniature schnauzer, waving like always. "You're so lucky. Orville," she called across the hedges. "That daughter-in-law of yours is gold. I see her walking back from the store with bags of groceries for you nearly every day." I forced a smile. "Yeah, she's helpful," Janet beamed. "Not everyone has family like that." I nodded and retreated inside, the mail crumpling in my hand. Marla had made sure she was seen. That much was clear, and Janet wasn't the only one watching. This was a performance, for the neighbors, for Grady, maybe even for me. But the act was cracking. That evening, after Ellis had gone to bed, I brought it up, casual, like I'd lost a sock. "Hey," I said, sitting across from Grady on the porch. "You or Marla move anything from the filing cabinet in my room. One of the envelopes is missing." He didn't look up from his phone. "She's been organizing your stuff, trying to help declutter. Probably put it somewhere safer." "Somewhere safer than a locked drawer?" He shrugged. "Dad, she's trying to help. You should be grateful." The words hit like a backhand. Grateful. I kept my voice even. "I am. Just wish I'd known." Grady changed the subject, asking something about the neighbor's pool construction. I answered, but the conversation had already gone stale. That phrase kept bouncing in my skull like a ricochet. You should be grateful. After dinner the next night, Marla offered to set up autopay for my water bill, said she could help monitor emails, too, just in case something slips through. "You never know these days," she said with that same polished smile. "It might be easier if I had your email password." I nodded. "Sure, let me think about that." She took it as agreement. I took it as escalation. Later, as I was rinsing dishes, Ellis stood beside me, drying plates in silence. He didn't say much lately, quiet kid, but he watched everything. "You okay, Grandpa?" The question surprised me. "I'm fine, buddy. Why do you ask?" "You looked mad. Not at me, just your eyes got quiet." I paused. "That's a good catch." He nodded, satisfied enough with that answer, and went off to play with his puzzles. That boy had sharper instincts than most adults I knew. The house settled into its evening rhythm. Marla upstairs, probably sorting more of my things. Grady with his laptop on the couch. Ellis reading. I sat on the porch, not really watching the street, just listening. Around midnight, I heard the faint creak of a floorboard upstairs, the kind that only groans when someone's tiptoeing. I stayed still, barely breathing, heart ticking like a silent metronome. Footsteps passed my bedroom door. The guest bathroom faucet ran for 3 seconds, just long enough to make noise. Nothing was taken this time, but it confirmed what I'd feared. They weren't just settling in, they were surveying, and I wasn't imagining things. I didn't confront anyone, yet. The afternoon sun cast soft shadows across the carpet, the kind of light that usually made my study feel warm, inhabited. But today, the room greeted me with a silence that felt too deliberate. The faint tick of the wall clock was louder than usual. I stepped inside and paused. There it was. The photo frame on my desk, the one with Mabel's smiling face in the backyard, her hands in the soil. Hair tied up with that same red scarf, was turned to face the wall. Not tilted, not fallen. Turned, deliberately. My hand hovered for a moment before touching it. No dust marks around it. No sign of it being bumped or brushed aside, just turned away, as if someone had found her too present. I righted the frame slowly. My fingers trembled more than I wanted them to. There were few things in this house that I guarded with sentiment. That photo was one of them. Mabel had sat with me through 1,000 late nights at that desk. Even now, her smile was the only thing that made numbers and statements and overdue letters feel like background noise. I didn't call out, didn't accuse. I just sat down in my chair, placed my hand palm down beside her frame, and closed my eyes for a long while. At dinner, between bites of overcooked chicken, I asked casually, "Did anyone move the picture on my desk?" Grady looked up from his plate. Ellis might have bumped it. He was in there playing with his cars this morning. Marla didn't even glance up, just poured water from the pitcher. Movements measured. The sound of the ice settling was the only reply she gave. I looked at her hands, noticed how she wiped the condensation off the pitcher with her napkin before returning it to the table. Always so precise, so intentional. "Ellis doesn't usually go into my study," I said, letting it float. Grady shrugged. "He's getting more curious." I nodded and didn't push further. But the thought stayed lodged, like grit under a contact lens. I had left that door closed, and Ellis wasn't tall enough to reach that frame. The next morning, I found Marla by the kitchen island, sipping tea with her phone face down on the marble. She looked rested, confident. "You know," she began, "I've been thinking, it might make things easier if we got ahead of estate stuff, just to avoid confusion down the line." I stayed silent, waited. "If you really loved us," she continued, voice soft like a nurse preparing a needle, "you'd consider transferring the house now, just for planning purposes. Keeps things simple, clean." She reached out and touched my arm gently. "It's about security. Orville, for all of us." I didn't move, didn't speak. Inside, something shifted. It wasn't rage, not quite, but it was close cousin. A slow burn that collected behind my ribs, warming the space Mabel used to fill. "I'll think about it," I said. She smiled and squeezed my forearm like I'd agreed to lunch. Later that day, I met Clay at the Fixer's Corner, the little garage-turned-coffee spot we'd both spent years tinkering in before they put espresso machines in every corner of town. He handed me a coffee, black with a touch of honey, just how I liked it, and leaned back in his chair. "You're lucky," he said. "Family under one roof? Can't ask for more." I sipped slowly. "Yeah, it's something." Clay laughed. "Wish I had someone bringing me groceries. You've got it good." I nodded, but couldn't find a reason to smile. Some truths are too ugly to share over coffee. That night, I sat at the same desk. Mabel's photo now clean and facing forward. I opened a notebook from the bottom drawer, one I'd kept blank for years. Page 1. What they touched that wasn't theirs. I began the list. March 2013 envelope. Bedroom drawer. Filing system. I never explained. Password hints on sticky notes. Mabel's frame. Final line on the page. If they can move my memories, they can move anything. I closed the notebook, slid it beneath a stack of bank statements, and clicked off the lamp. The room went dark, but I didn't feel blind. The eggs were already cooling on the plate when I noticed the silence. The kind that doesn't hum with peaceful morning air, but presses in, like something's missing. I looked at the table, 3 plates, 2 people, no Ellis. I sipped my coffee, waiting for someone to speak. Marla was scrolling on her phone, smiling faintly. Grady stirred his cereal like it might reveal a better version of his life at the bottom of the bowl. "Ellis sleeping in?" I asked, keeping it light. Marla looked up. "Oh, didn't we mention it? He started at a new school today, closer to where we might be living next." I set down my mug carefully. "Next?" Grady still didn't meet my eyes. "We're just exploring options," Marla said quickly. He needed the change anyway. "That old school wasn't challenging enough." A short pause. "I would have liked to say goodbye," I said. "Oh," she replied, not quite apologetic. "It all happened fast, but it hadn't. Not really. Transfers don't happen overnight, and Ellis hadn't said a word at dinner last night. I wondered if he even knew he wasn't coming back here." Marla stood, her chair barely scraping the floor, and carried her plate to the sink. "You'll see him this weekend," she said with a smile. "We're just adjusting to a new routine." I nodded slowly, but my appetite was gone. At lunch, the silence turned tactical. Marla was all business, talking about real estate markets, how it might be smart to downsize before the holidays. She phrased it like a favor, as if she were sparing me from the burden of square footage. "It's really about safety," she added. "You don't want to be alone in a house this size." Grady stabbed at his salad, chewing without looking up. I asked, "Whose safety are we talking about?" She tilted her head, smile frozen. "Yours, of course." He didn't speak, didn't blink, and in that silence, I heard something louder than words: consent. That night, just past midnight, the floor groaned in the hallway. I'd lived in this house for over 30 years. I knew every creak and moan it made in the dark. This one wasn't random. It was a calculated step, someone avoiding the noisy spots. I stayed still in bed, the covers drawn up to my chest, eyes open in the dark. Then came the whisper. "If we time it right, he won't even notice the deed switch." It was Marla's voice. A pause. Then Grady's response. Softer, hesitant. "Just don't involve me when it goes wrong." My heart didn't race. It dropped. Like a man who's known all along what's coming, but hoped it would pass by his door. I didn't move until the hallway went silent again. In the morning, Marla stood in the kitchen, packing a lunchbox with practiced cheer, apple slices, a sandwich with the crusts cut off, a juice box. She kissed Grady on the cheek, then turned and caught me watching. "We're almost there," she said, that same smile again, too symmetrical, too smooth. I nodded, said nothing, and waited for them to leave. When the door shut behind them, I stood at the window and watched their car pull away. Ellis waved from the back seat, the only honest gesture in that whole performance. That evening, I returned to the study. The notebook was where I left it. I opened to the next page. "I'm not being paranoid. I'm being watched and used." I underlined it, then circled the word at the center of it all: deed. The table was set. The roast was sliced, and for once, I had even remembered to warm the rolls. A small detail, but one that used to earn me a proud glance from my wife. Tonight, it earned nothing. "Dad," Marla said mid-meal, "I noticed you left the oven on again yesterday. We really should start labeling things. Maybe even install a smart system that alerts us when you forget." I reached for the mashed potatoes, letting the comment pass like steam from the gravy boat. Ellis looked up from his plate. Grady didn't. He chewed with slow indifference, eyes focused on a spot just past the salt shaker. Marla wasn't done. "Also," she added brightly, "the electric bill was past due. You probably meant to pay it, but you know how these things slip your mind." She chuckled, a sound too rehearsed to be spontaneous. I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because I'd learned that silence, when held long enough, could be sharper than a knife. Still, Something inside me thudded, not snapped, just dulled. After dinner, Ellis followed me to the den. He climbed into my lap like he used to when he was smaller. "Mom says you need help," he whispered, head against my shoulder. "But I think you're smarter than all of us. You just don't say much." The words sat in my chest like a stone. I didn't respond. I only held him tighter, one hand gently patting his back, as if reassuring him, or maybe myself, once he was asleep. I returned to my room and pulled open the drawer I had checked so many times before. The folders were neat, but something was off. A single fingerprint smudge marred the corner of the manila envelope that held my 1998 property reassessment. It hadn't been there before. I felt under the drawer's base. The thin wooden panel lifted with ease, revealing the old flip phone I'd stashed away months ago. Time to make a call. The garage smelled like oil and forgotten dreams. I stood near the workbench and dialed the only number saved in the burner phone. "Winona Blight speaking?" "Orville Shipley," I said, my voice low. "This line's secure?" "As secure as a garage in Clearwater can be," she replied. "What's going on?" "I think they're building a case. To push me out legally. Possibly guardianship. Maybe more." There was a beat of silence on her end. "Do they have a doctor's letter? Are they tracking your memory lapses?" "No, not yet. But they're poking holes, making jabs at forgetfulness, trying to position themselves like caregivers." Winona exhaled. "Then we need to move quickly. If they get legal grounds, you'll lose control of everything." I looked at the shelves of tools, each one older than Ellis, but better maintained. "Can you come by?" "I'll schedule something quietly," she said. "But Orville, start documenting everything." We hung up. Back inside. The kitchen was dim. A single light above the sink cast a pale glow on the family photo propped against the backsplash. Grady, Marla, Ellis, and me, at some picnic 2 years ago. Everyone was smiling, even me. I picked up the frame, studied each face, then set it back down. "You want to see what I forget?" I muttered. "Let's make sure I remember everything now." Back in the study, I started a new notebook. I listed dates, conversations, every passive comment, every strange look, every moment where the air had shifted. They wanted me to forget. I'd remember it all. There was a certain stillness in the house that morning, not peaceful, not comforting, just calculated. The kind of quiet that made you feel like something had already been decided without your input. Marla had made cinnamon rolls. She didn't cook often, which made the gesture stick out like a sore thumb. She even wore an apron, though I doubted flour had ever touched it. "We were thinking," she began, setting a roll on my plate. "It might be smart to revisit the deed. Make sure things are simple in case of anything unexpected." I didn't answer. My coffee had gone cold before I took the first sip. Grady muttered something about just planning ahead, but he didn't meet my eyes. He hadn't, not really, in days. After they left for the store, I walked into the study. The air felt heavier there. Maybe it was the old carpet, or maybe it was the stack of intentions piling up around me. I opened my drawer and pulled out the manila folder where I kept my original house deed, except it wasn't there. In its place was a copy, one with a different date and a third signature field I'd never seen before. The name filled that space like a brand seared into paper, Marla Shipley. The penmanship was unfamiliar, too neat, too practiced. I stood there a full minute, hands resting on the edge of the desk, breathing through the quiet fury rising from my gut. I didn't confront them, not yet. Instead, I made another call. "Winona Blight?" The voice answered crisply. "It's gone," I said. "The deed." "They've swapped it." There was a pause, then a low exhale. "Okay," she said. "Then we escalate." We arranged a meeting, discreet. The kind of place where no one asked questions. The Mariners Club on the edge of town. I hadn't been there in years. Not since a retirement lunch that had more polite laughter than genuine goodbyes. Winona arrived 10 minutes after me, sliding into the booth like she belonged to every wood-paneled corner in America. "I'll file an injunction," she said, placing a thin folder between us. "But it'll only hold if you prove coercion or intent to defraud. They're pushing for guardianship next." She nodded. "Then you'll need more than suspicion. You'll need their words. On record." I left the booth with a list in my jacket pocket and a second burner phone in my glove compartment. That night, I sat at the kitchen table pretending to read a magazine while Grady and Marla talked about landscaping. "You know," she said, "the backyard would be easier to maintain without the garden. We could level it, maybe add a deck." "Sure," Grady replied. "Whatever you think, hun." It was the casual way he said it that hit hardest. Not the words themselves, but the way he'd become a passenger in his own marriage, drifting further away from me every day. When they went to bed, I stood in the hallway, letting the night settle around me. The house creaked in the usual places, but now I listened differently, not like a man protecting his home, like a man under quiet siege. Back in my study, I opened the journal and wrote 2 new headings: what they've taken, what I'm taking back. Beneath the second, I wrote one word in ink darker than anything else on the page: control. The house whispered differently that night, not the soft creaks of aging wood, but something sharper, intentional, the kind of silence that warns you someone else is awake. I found Ellis sitting on the hallway floor, legs pulled into his chest, his pajama shirt bunched under his chin. His eyes flicked up at me when I approached, but he didn't speak right away. "She said guardianship," he murmured, voice barely a breath. "Is that a good thing?" It took everything in me to stay upright. My knees wanted to give out, not from shock, but the kind of sorrow that clings to your spine. "She was talking to someone on the phone," Ellis added, his hands fiddling with the frayed hem of his sleeve. "She said you wouldn't even notice." I knelt slowly beside him, placed a hand on his shoulder. I didn't say a word. Sometimes, silence carries more weight than explanation. Ellis leaned into the hug like a boy who'd been holding something heavy for too long. The next morning, Marla handed me my iPad with a grin that didn't quite touch her eyes. "I updated your settings," she said. "Some apps were acting weird." "You don't really know how they work anyway, right?" Grady, across the table, focused intently on peeling his orange. His fingers trembled. I took the iPad, tapped the screen, and looked up. "I figured out tech back when modems sang to us. You remember that sound?" Marla chuckled, too quickly. "Oh, I'm sure you did, Dad." I smiled, not kindly. Later that afternoon, I headed to the garage. Clay was already there, elbow deep in an old engine block. The smell of grease and rust felt like home. "If someone wanted to take over your life," I said. "Legally, how would you know?" Clay didn't look up. "They'd start with the little things, missed pills, forgetting bills. Then they'd talk to your friends less, make decisions for you." He glanced my way. "Eventually, they'd call you dangerous, for your own good, of course." I nodded. Every step had already happened. Inside, I unlocked the metal box behind my bookshelf. The one with the hidden latch and the false bottom. I added more documents, printouts of text messages, backup copies of emails, dates, timestamps. I slid in a USB with audio clips. I labeled the folder, if they ever ask. A fresh page joined the stack. Who said what? When? I sharpened a pencil before writing. That night, I baked banana bread. It had always been my wife's recipe, moist, not too sweet, with a hint of cinnamon. I offered a slice to Marla as she worked at the kitchen counter. She blinked in surprise. "Thank you. That's thoughtful." I watched her take a bite. She smiled, closed her eyes. They always forget, I thought. Poison comes sweet. Of course, there was no poison, not yet. But in that moment, I understood what power looked like. not in confrontation, but in patience. There was no shortage of sun when I stepped into the locked closet this morning. Rays filtered in through the slats of the blinds, spotlighting the safe I knew too well. My heart didn't flutter, it settled, steady as a clock. As I opened it one more time, inside lay the documents I'd stashed, copies of the forged deed, Winona's invitation to meet, and the recording USB labeled Late Night Whispers. I slid out my original will, folded neatly beneath everything else, and placed it in a slim, black folder I carried into the living room. Later that afternoon, the hearing began in the small municipal building down the road, not far from the bank branch. The room looked official but ordinary. Grady and Marla sat across from us, their faces polite masks, while Winona leaned forward in her chair with quiet conviction. Marla went first. She presented her case. Mr. Shipley needs assistance managing household affairs. She handed over documents with what she claimed was my signature. Grady nodded beside her, eyes flickering over to me once. No apology, just expectation. Then Winona stood. She placed a thumb drive on the wooden table. "We have evidence," she said, voice calm. "Allow Mr. Shipley to speak for himself." I pressed play on Winona's laptop. The small speaker crackled, then carried Marla's voice clear into the hush. "If we time it right, he won't even notice the deed switch." A silence so thick you could taste it followed her words. Marla's hand shook. Grady exhaled sharply. I leaned back against the wall, feeling the weight of every disloyal step they'd taken. Ellis, who'd been outside the glass partition, peeked in, face pale. He caught my eye and nodded. That child carried more truth than some adults I knew. The judge leaned forward. "Is that your voice, Ms. Shipley?" Her lips parted. No words came. Grady looked at me then, eyes desperate for a reaction. I nodded ever so slightly. "Enough. We intended to help," Marla tried, voice flat. I cleared my throat. "You didn't forge my signature, but you erased my dignity." The room shifted. The momentum tipped. Winona whispered to me, "That was enough." Her folder slid across the table toward me. We left with no verdict declared, but the air had changed. The power they tried to crush me with was now in safe hands. That evening, when the front door clicked shut behind Grady and Marla, I stood at the window and watched their car rumble down the street. Ellis waved again, smaller and more sincere than ever. Back inside, I replaced the original documents in the safe and locked it. I shelved away the copies for Winona. Then I turned around and looked at the group photo on the wall, him, her, Ellis, and me under the oak tree, smiles fixed in time. Next to it, I placed the black folder with everything, because truth deserved a place of honor. And silence finally had a voice. The courthouse steps were still warm beneath my shoes, even as the sun dipped toward the gulf. Ellis walked beside me, his hand gripping two of my fingers like he had when he was smaller. I thought he was just quiet, taking in the day. But as we turned the corner, he tugged gently. "Does Grandpa have a disease?" I stopped. "What was that, Bud?" He looked down at the sidewalk. "Mom said you might forget me, that sometimes you talk to people who aren't there." A silence heavier than any verdict settled between us. I crouched to his level, put both hands on his shoulders. "Listen to me," I said. "I remember every second with you. I remember when you lost your first tooth, how you hated broccoli, and how you still sleep with that stuffed raccoon with the crooked eye." Ellis grinned. "Barely." "I remember everything that matters," I said. He hugged me hard, his small arms around my neck. I didn't let go for a while. Back at home, the air had shifted, not clean, just still. Grady slammed the bedroom door behind him without a word. The sound echoed down the hall like punctuation. Marla moved through the kitchen like nothing had happened, humming softly while checking her phone. I walked to the study, opened the safe, removed the original documents, real deed, original will, recordings, and slid in a new folder labeled Household Budget. Inside, dummy deed copies, meaningless papers, Just enough to distract, if needed. Let them search. Let them find what they think is important. That night, Winona came by. I made coffee, black, no sugar, and we sat on the back porch while cicadas buzzed their approval of dusk. "The court will lean on your audio," she said, hands folded around her mug. "But they'll also watch your every move now. Any mistake, any moment of forgetfulness, they'll pounce." I nodded. "So I don't forget." She reached into her bag and handed me a small envelope. "Use this if anything changes." I handed her one back. "Real deed, just in case." It read. Winona smiled. "Your poker face is stronger than mine. That's why I never learned the game," I said. Dinner was quiet. Ellis ate in silence. Grady toyed with his fork. Marla, always the actress, asked if we'd like to watch a movie together. "No thanks," I said. She cleared her throat. I know it got messy. I just want to know if you'll ever forgive me." I looked at her, steady. "I'll forgive," I said, "when you stop pretending it was love." She said nothing after that. Later, when the house had settled, I sat in the study with my journal. The lamplight was soft, and the pages looked worn in a comforting way. From the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow in the hallway. Ellis stood there, silent, watching. After a moment, he smiled. Then he turned and walked away. I turned the page and wrote, "For Ellis, I endure. For truth, I prepare." The kitchen table had seen 30 years of life, birthday candles, spilled juice, Mabel's crossword puzzles. This morning, it bore something quieter but far heavier: justice. Winona laid out the final version of my will, each page crisp and clearly marked. Two of my neighbors, Tom and Beatrice, stood as silent witnesses, their presence a shield against future doubt. I signed slowly, not from hesitation, but intent. The pen glided across the page as if it understood the weight it carried. Ellis Shipley, sole heir, no contingencies, no shared trust, just him. I slid the will into a manila folder, and hours later, I walked into the Clearwater branch of Seabreeze Bank. Under a new safety deposit account, registered under the middle name no one remembered I had, I placed the folder inside, tucked neatly behind a pair of decoy investment forms. Walking out, I didn't feel triumphant, just steady. The next afternoon, I stopped by the bank again, needing to check my statement. A young teller smiled politely, then paused at her screen. "Sir," she asked, "do you have guardianship authority on file? Your son inquired about gaining access on your behalf." My mouth went dry. I kept my voice calm. "No guardianship exists, nor should it." She nodded quickly. "Of course, just confirming." So they'd tried again, this time through money. Grady hadn't even had the nerve to ask me directly. At dinner that evening, Marla brought out a small notepad, her smile poised. "We thought," she said sweetly, "maybe we do one last sit-down with a family counselor, before we all make any permanent choices." She looked at Grady, who gave a faint, almost apologetic shrug. I set my fork down. "Counselors work for families. This house hasn't been one for weeks." Marla's smile faltered. She stood, said nothing, and left the room. Grady followed a moment later, shoulders low. Later that night, Ellis joined me on the porch. The wind smelled faintly of cut grass and the sea. "If you had to do it all over again," he asked, "would you still let us move in?" The question caught me off guard, not because I hadn't considered it, but because I didn't expect him to ask. "Yes," I said, "because I needed to know the truth, and you needed to stay safe." Ellis nodded. He didn't understand all of it, but he understood enough. We sat quietly, the kind of quiet that isn't heavy, just shared. When the house finally settled, I returned to the kitchen and opened the second drawer near the stove. Inside, I placed an envelope labeled in careful handwriting. For Ellis, not until you're 21. It held a letter, a photo of me and Mabel in 1978, and a separate key to a box Winona had arranged to transfer in his name when the time came. I locked the drawer, slid the key back into the hollowed-out baseboard. Grady and Marla would be gone soon. I didn't know where. But I knew where I'd be, right here, waiting for my grandson to grow into the man I hoped he could become. The room was still, too still. The guest bed was stripped bare, the closet empty, bathroom shelves cleared like they'd never been touched. A single brass key rested on the kitchen counter, next to the fruit bowl no one had touched in weeks. They were gone. No slamming doors, no final argument, just gone. And yet, the silence left behind felt heavier than any shouting match could have. I stood in the threshold of what used to be their room and let it settle in my bones. The air wasn't empty. It was relieved. Later that day, I stopped by Winona's office one last time. We went over the educational trust for Ellis, final papers, clean lines, signatures, all in order. The numbers on the page were significant, but it wasn't the money that mattered. You gave him more than inheritance, Winona said, sliding the folder closed. You gave him a version of the truth no one can revise. I nodded. He deserves to know what love looks like in action. Outside, the sky was blue without fanfare, quiet weather, the kind that doesn't boast, it just holds. That evening, on the porch, I found a folded envelope addressed to me. The handwriting was Grady's. No return address. No preamble. Just a single page. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I hope Ellis grows up knowing who really protected him. I read it twice. Then I struck a match and let the flame eat its way through the paper, watching the ash curl in the breeze like the last breath of a chapter I never thought I'd have to write. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like release. The next morning, Ellis and I walked the park trail that winds past the duck pond, where Mabel used to feed crumbs from stale biscuits. He skipped a stone across the water, missed, then tried again. When I'm older, he said, I want to be like you. I raised a brow. Old and grumpy? He grinned. Brave, but quiet. I laughed, a full sound, deeper than I'd expected. Just don't forget to be kind. He nodded, serious in that way kids get when they're storing words for later. When we got home, I made coffee the old-fashioned way. Let the pot gurgle and steam while the house remained still, not empty, just finally at peace. In my study, I opened the journal to the final page. With a steady hand, I wrote, Justice doesn't always knock, it waits. Then I closed the book, and I rested. The old oak tree had always stood with quiet dignity, never needing to prove its strength. This morning, I sat beneath it with a worn leather notebook and a pen that had signed more contracts than birthday cards. I wrote slowly. The letter wasn't long, just enough to hold weight. Addressed to the Clearwater County Court, it clarified that I, Orville Shipley, would no longer entertain or accept any future familial guardianship claims from Grady Shipley or Marla Shipley. I ended it with a single line. Silence protects, but truth, once spoken, sets the ground beneath your feet. It wasn't about revenge. It was about leaving no room for revision. Later that afternoon, Winona posted the court's ruling on the public board outside the courthouse. Laminated, official, understated. Mr. Orville Shipley has formally rescinded all familial guardianship claims. See attached ruling. Beneath it, someone had anonymously pinned a newspaper clipping from the Tampa Tribune. The headline read, Rise in Elder Financial Abuse in Gulf Communities. The article was circled in red ink. No name, no note. Vindication doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it's the quiet kind, like the wind shifting in your favor after a long storm. The following week, the Clearwater Community Library hosted its monthly Voices from the Porch series. They asked me to read a short piece for the seniors group. I stepped up to the mic and unfolded my page. It was titled, 3 Things They Tried to Take. I'll keep this brief, I began. The first was my home, the second, my memory, and the third, was my voice. A pause. But I kept that one sharp as ever. The room didn't erupt in cheers. It just stilled. A few quiet nods. That was enough. Some time later, Ellis, now a little taller, eyes a little wiser, found the locked drawer in the kitchen and used the key I'd left taped beneath his favorite cereal box. Inside, a letter addressed in my handwriting, for when you question everything. He read it sitting on the porch swing, alone. It didn't tell him what to believe. It didn't scold or instruct. It ended simply, protect what you know is right, even from those you love. That was the inheritance that mattered. That evening, I watered the garden. The tomato vines were stubborn this season, but the mint had come back strong. A neighbor walked by with her dog. "You still do it all yourself, Mr. Shipley?" I smiled. "If you let others do it, make sure they're not replacing you while they do." She laughed. "Fair enough." I shut the garden hose, wiped my hands, and walked back inside. The door closed gently behind me. Peace doesn't arrive loudly, but when it does, you know it's yours.